Hello, folks. We'll be starting in just another minute or two here. Thank you for joining us today. Hello, my name is Daniel Schoonmaker. I'm the Executive Director of West Michigan Sustainable Business Forum, and I'm pleased to welcome you to today's presentation of the Michigan Sustainable Business Forum webinar series. For those that are not familiar with our organization, the forum is a collaboration of businesses and institutions dedicated to promoting practices that advance climate leadership, social justice, and the creation of a circular economy. We host events and programs throughout the state, including this monthly Michigan Sustainable Business Forum webinar series. The webinar series is presented by Shupan, with additional support from Foresight Management and the Environmental Defense Fund. And with me today is my colleague, Rose Spickler, who will be advancing the slides at any point now.
I apologize, my computer is frozen momentarily.
Okay.
Good now.
Thank you, Rose. A few upcoming in-person events I'd like to highlight. We have two upcoming educational networking events. The first is our Southwest Michigan June Forum, which will host a discussion on how to create an advanced circular economy in Michigan at Whirlpool headquarters in Benton Harbor on Tuesday, June 14th at noon. And this will feature a presentation on the County Sustainable Business Park and the Padno Sustainability City. Also looking ahead to our next event in Grand Rapids is our West Michigan Sustainable Business Forum annual meeting, this year hosted at the Grand Rapids Center for Community Transformation. Keep an eye out for speaker details on that, which will be coming in the next day or two here. Then our webinar series continues on June 9th with a briefing on the proposed SEC rules for carbon disclosure, which are likely to have a profound impact on climate action in the state, mandating, among other things, expanded scope through reporting and supply chain engagements. Also, if you have not done so, we are currently circulating a brief survey on sustainability and circularity practices for businesses and institutions and states. Please do take a moment to fill it out this afternoon if you have not already. This survey has been open for a few months now, but we'll be closing that down over the next few weeks here. Finally, please do consider becoming a member of the forum. If you're already a corporate or institutional member of one of our regional programs, a professional Michigan Sustainable Business Forum membership is complimentary. If not, you become a professional member today for only $50. Now I'd like to introduce our program for the day, how Ukraine is impacting energy markets and encouraging decarbonization. For our attendees, please note that you can share thoughts and questions with panelists or all attendees through the chat function. We'll have time at the end of the presentation for open questions and answers. Our panel today includes Paul Isley, Associate Dean of the Seaman College of Business at Grand Valley State University. Paul joined the Grand Valley faculty in 1995 after earning his PhD in economics from Purdue University. Dr. Isley has taught many different courses at GVSU, including environmental economics, which looks at sustainable and efficient resource uses. He has published in several areas of sustainability focus, including recycling, energy use, and environmental cleanup. He's currently chair of the United Utility Consumer Participation Board, a governor-appointed board dealing with residential utility rates. He has also been a Westminster Sustainable Business Forum board member since 2017. First, I'd like to welcome Adam Scripps, an account manager with DT Energy, who supports over 100 large commercial industrial accounts across West Michigan. In this role, Scripps develops long-term relationships with customers, managers their expansion projects, and makes recommendations to utility to utilize natural gas in facilities. Prior to joining DTE, Scripps held a variety of roles in BP's North American Marketing and Trading Organization, which included roles in business origination, natural gas trading, market risks, and accounting. These experiences and his interest in natural gas marketing make a value resource to DTE's West Michigan clients. In his free time, Scripps enjoys spending time with his family, specifically mountain biking with his 3 kids and spending time in northern Michigan. He's a former Peace Corps volunteer and holds a bachelor's degree in MBA from Grand Valley State University. Adam, looking forward to hearing your thoughts today, and if you wouldn't mind sharing your screen.
Let's see. All right. Thank you for having me. I kind of value this opportunity to get in front of the group and share some of the insights I have at DT with my role there. So again, my name is Adam Scripps. I'm with DT. I work in their gas major accounts group, where we work with some of the largest commercial and industrial accounts in West Michigan and help them manage their energy consumption at their facilities. I've been in that role for the past 8 years. And I've been in the industry since, in the natural gas industry since 2008. I've also recently been tasked with the rollout of our natural gas balance program at DT, which is available to our residential, commercial, and industrial customers. That program allows customers to offset their CO2 profile from the use of natural gas with either renewable natural gas or carbon offsets. Before coming to DT, I worked for BP in Traverse City in Chicago as part of their natural gas trading and marketing business. And when I started with BP in Traverse City, I got to work under a couple people with a tremendous amount of experience in the industry. That office actually only had about 10 employees on Front Street. But at that point, we were one of only a couple offices throughout the world that was allowed to trade physically and financially in natural gas. So that was a really unique opportunity. The other areas that were allowed to trade natural gas products were energy hubs like London, Houston, Singapore. So to have that opportunity in a town like Traverse City was pretty unique. And that was a great spot to start my career and really fueled my interest in the industry. So my conversation with you today will focus on interesting projects happening at DTE. Specifically, I want to focus on natural gas projects that have had a large economic impact in our area and that are interesting for their environmental merits. I'm also going to cover the evolution of the natural gas market since I joined the industry in 2008. As many on this call are probably aware of, we've seen a rapid rise in commodity prices across the board, but specifically natural gas is at a 14-year high. So we're going to cover some of that. And then we're also going to discuss energy implications for the war in Ukraine. So a little bit about DTE. I'm sure most on the call are familiar with us. We are a regulated gas and electric utility serving the state of Michigan. On the electric side, we serve 2.2 million customers, and our territory is Detroit into the thumb on the east side of the state. And then DTE Gas serves about 1.3 million customers. Our territory is Detroit into Ann Arbor, and then what we refer to as Greater Michigan, which extends just south of Grand Rapids, up through the lower peninsula and into pockets of the upper peninsula. Many of you might not know that we have a couple unregulated businesses. One is DT Vantage that does large power and industrial projects throughout the country. The last 10 years or more, they've really been focused on developing renewable natural gas projects, and the majority of that work is happening on the West Coast and in California. We also have DT Energy Trading, which is based in Ann Arbor, and they trade power and natural gas throughout the country. Like many on the call, DT has made some environmental commitments over the last several years, and this slide highlights DT's emission reduction commitment in our natural gas business and displays where emissions are happening throughout our value chain. So upstream activities account for about 15% of the emissions bringing gas molecules to market. These activities include the production of gas when you're pulling gas out of the ground, and the processing and transportation to move that gas to market. Utility distribution activities make up about 5% of the value chain's emissions. And then actually downstream activities make up about 80% of the emissions. This takes place at the end user's facility when you actually burn that molecule and produce combustion-related emissions. So on the upstream and utility distribution side of our business, we're committed to going to net zero by 2050. And on the downstream side, or the customer side, we're committed to reducing emissions by 35% by 2040. That's going to be very difficult for us to do, as we're not the operators of our customers' thermostats or boilers. To reduce emissions for facilities we don't own or operate, we're going to leverage our existing DT Energy Efficiency Rebate Program, and we're also going to expand our natural gas balance program, which at the present moment consists of renewable natural gas and carbon offsets. So a little bit about our DT Natural Gas Balance Program. It was created in 2021, currently has about 6,500 customers subscribed. It's available to all of our 1.3 million residential, commercial, and industrial customers located throughout the state. This program allows customers to purchase renewable natural gas or carbon offsets to reduce or completely offset their CO2 emissions profile from the use of natural gas. One very interesting aspect of this program that we've been very intentional about is sourcing renewable natural gas and forestry offsets from within the state. We have an RNG supply agreement with a landfill in Canton, Michigan. We also have carbon offset projects from forestry projects in the UP and Lower Peninsula. If anyone on this call is interested in discussing this program, please feel free to reach out to me. It's completely customizable so that you can self-select your product mix between RNG and carbon offsets, and you can also select your level of participation. So a couple of big projects that are happening at DT. We've got our Blue Water Energy Center. This is a 1,150 megawatt power plant, $1 billion investment for a new natural gas power plant. This is replacing 3 coal-fired generation plants and supporting DT's goal of reducing carbon emissions. They started construction in 2019, and they expect commercial operations to commence a little bit later this summer. Our Nexus pipeline is the next project I want to highlight. This is a 50-50 partnership between DT and Enbridge Energy. It's a little bit older now, but it was in service as of October of 2018. It is a 255-mile, 36-inch pipe that is delivering 1.5 BCF a day of Marcellus and Utica shale gas into Michigan. And those are 2 of the largest and fastest growing basins in North America. What this pipeline does for end users in Michigan helps reduce volatility and pricing by adding diversity of supply. So if you look at the way Michigan is positioned currently, we have long-haul pipelines serving the state from a variety of basins throughout the country. We have ANR, Panhandle, and Trunkline that are all coming up through Texas, Louisiana, and offshore serving Michigan. Then we have Rockies Express, which is bringing molecules from Colorado into Michigan. And then we even have Great Lakes, which is originating in Canada, flowing through Alberta, through the Upper Peninsula, down through Michigan and back into Canada. So all of those pipelines just add diversity of supply, and Nexus is just a pipeline that connects us with some of the East Coast shale production that's come online in the last 10 years. So a couple coal-fired plant retirements that we have coming about this year. We are retiring River Rouge, St. Clair, and Trenton Channel. We also have Bell River set to retire in 2030, and our Monroe Power Plant set to retire in 2040. We're quadrupling renewables by 2040 in our portfolio, and we currently operate 50 wind and solar farms in Michigan, which is enough to power 700,000 homes. A couple large projects that we just want to touch on that should be of interest to participants in this webinar. First one is the Ford Campus of the Future, and this is their central energy plant at their Research and Engineering Center. This is a collaboration between DTE and Ford. The steam from this system serves Ford, and the electricity goes to the grid down in southeast Michigan. They installed 2 Solar Titan 130 natural gas-fired turbines, which generates 34 megawatts of power. This system will replace aging boilers and will use significantly less natural gas than their traditional plant. By producing power locally and with natural gas, the plant will see significant emissions improvements. This CHP, or combined heat and power system, is also an anchor for a microgrid there. They have 4 megawatts of solar on the campus that is supported. A little bit closer to home, we have the Rapid bus fleet. We helped them build a new CNG station on Market Avenue downtown in 2016. Since then, they've converted over 100 buses from diesel to natural gas, making Grand Rapids the owner of Michigan's largest natural gas fleet. They expect a full fleet transition by 2028, which will be 150 buses. A couple of interesting aspects about this project: the seating for all their buses is actually manufactured by GR-based American Seating, and the buses are manufactured by Gillig in Livermore, California. Each one is driven to Grand Rapids, which is about a 2,300-mile drive, utilizing existing CNG infrastructure throughout the country. They expect to see 20 to 30% fewer emissions when compared with their diesel-powered buses, and the projected savings for the project is about $4.5 million. A new, really interesting wrinkle for this project is they're working with the city of Grand Rapids. They have a wastewater treatment plant just down the street. They were looking at expansion due to the growth of Grand Rapids and some of their largest users. They actually installed anaerobic biodigesters on their property. And what those biodigesters do is they take the solids that are left over from the wastewater treatment plant, put them in a huge stainless steel container. It's heated up, allowed to break down, which creates a mixture of gases, but it's mostly methane. That methane is then cleaned up to a pipeline spec. It's put onto our system, moved a couple blocks down the street, where it will be utilized with the Rapid, which will displace a traditional natural gas. So that's a really interesting, innovative collaboration that's happening right here in Grand Rapids. The next project I have for you is Eastern Michigan, their campus sustainability. They installed a 7.8 megawatt solar Taurus 70 natural gas fired turbine. You can actually see the unit being hoisted by a crane into a large hole that they had to cut into the side of their building to get this unit in there. But as you can see, it comes essentially plug and play and ready for installation. This has been operating since February of 2018. It provides 98% of the heat and 93% of electricity to Eastern's 800-acre campus. They were advantageous, and they locked in 2 5-year forward purchases for natural gas for the unit in 2017 and another in 2018. And what that did is it essentially locked in the economics of the project and ensured savings. And with what's happening in the current market, those purchases look especially attractive with everything that's going on. Annual net energy savings is $2.8 million or $50,000 a week. And it replaces a 28-year-old cogeneration system that supplied 50% of the campus needs. So they are not new to this type of technology, and they've been using it for many, many years. This project will eliminate 21,000 tons of carbon dioxide annually. So it's a great project for them. A little bit closer to home again, we've got Amazon throughout the state. They've invested over $6 billion with new facilities, created 21,000 jobs. This picture is actually a picture in Gaines Township, just south of the airport, where they built almost 1 million square foot distribution center, which many of you have seen. 50-foot ceilings in the building. We got to walk it right before it was turned over, and the amount of automation, conveyor systems is pretty impressive. And I think most of the conveyor racks and things like that are built by Dematic here in Grand Rapids. The last project I have for you is the Iroko plant up in Grayling, Michigan. This opened in 2019. It's almost 1 million square feet, but it's the largest particle board plant in the world. It supplies IKEA and Souder woodworking in Ohio. They looked at 10 different states before choosing to site this in Michigan. And a couple reasons they did that are existing natural gas infrastructure, access to gas storage in the state, limited threats or curtailments, attractive pricing, and then close proximity to wood and raw materials, and of course their North American customer base. All right, shifting gears a little bit, I want to talk to you about natural gas pricing. So I've been in this industry since 2008. The changes I've witnessed are pretty remarkable. The thing I love about this industry is just that when you think you've got things figured out, everything changes, and it involves geography, economics, geopolitics, weather, shipping, pipelines. It's pretty dynamic and incredible industry to be a part of. So on pricing, the chart here speaks for itself, but this is a price graph from January of 2000 to current. When I started in the industry, gas was trading in the $10 to $15 range. Since that time, prices have fallen dramatically, mostly due to the shale revolution in this country. But as you can see, prices have jumped recently and remain near a 14-year high. So you have to go all the way back to 2008 to find a price this high, and a lot of end users throughout the state are wondering why. So I've got a couple things that I can speak to for that. So I guess the first one is late spring rallies aren't uncommon. There are supply concerns in the short term. We experienced colder than normal temps last month and generally this spring. And at the same time, unseasonably hot temperatures boosted gas-fired cooling demand in Texas. So what this does is it virtually eliminates our shoulder season for natural gas to build storage inventories. And that's exactly what has happened. Natural gas storage in the ground is currently 15% below the 5-year average and is 18% below this time last year. Another thing is the NOAA's Climate Prediction Center forecasts a 65% chance of an above normal hurricane season this year. This comes on the back of 2 extremely active seasons for hurricanes. And what that does is it has a potential to impact a lot of offshore production in the South. The other thing that's of interest is on the demand side, there's limited fuel switching options, and record high gas exports have also put pressure on existing supply. So a typical response in the past would be that power generators would be incentivized to burn more coal than gas if natural gas prices ran up, and that response simply isn't there. A lot of coal capacity has been retired over the last decade. Those coal retirements have been made for economic and environmental reasons and have absolutely impacted the amount of capacity available for fuel switching. Current coal prices also around the world are under pressure and rising. Coal prices from the Illinois basin are at their highest prices since 2005. So gas and coal are both at historic highs, and this has really narrowed the spread between the two fuels. When fuel prices are in the same vicinity, economic fuel switching is less likely to happen on a large scale. Shifting gears to talk about LNG, or liquefied natural gas. When I got my start in this industry in 2008, Cheniere Energy had just built the Sabine Pass liquefied gas terminal as an import terminal in Louisiana. They ended up reconfiguring the terminal to be bidirectional and shipped their first cargo in February of 2016. As you can see, the US wasn't exporting much at the beginning of 2016. Since then, the US has become the world's largest exporter with a daily capacity of almost 14 BCF a day. Two interesting things about liquefied natural gas. A typical tanker takes over 20 hours to fill at temperatures of negative 260 degrees Fahrenheit. At those temps, natural gas becomes a liquid and is 600 times smaller than in its gaseous form. So it's pretty interesting stuff. All right, moving on to Ukraine and what is happening in Europe. I could spend a lot of time looking at this image. There's just a lot to take in, but the map shows the major natural gas lines serving Europe and the LNG terminals throughout Europe, which are the green diamonds. The EU depends on energy imports, and they've been as high as 60% in recent years. 3 countries get 100% of their natural gas from Russia, and 13 countries get more than half their gas supply from Russia. The total EU energy import value from Russia was $148 billion US dollars in 2021. And the EU has decreased its natural gas production from 2000 to 2020 by almost 80%. And that's mostly due to depleted domestic reserves in the North Sea and a shift towards clean energy. Speaking to Germany specifically, they received 40% of their natural gas from Russia in 2021, but has vowed to slash that number to 10% by the summer of 2024. Germany currently has no LNG regasification capacity, so they're really very isolated when it comes to ability to diversify supply. Due to high gas prices, Gazprom, the Russian state-owned gas company, earned $20.5 billion from European gas sales in the first 2 months of the year, and that's nearly as much as it made in all of 2020. So you have a product that the EU is looking to reduce consumption on, but because of that, prices have increased dramatically. And so from the Russian standpoint, they're shipping less of their product, but they're getting paid about the same. So it's quite a problem. And this relationship has significant morality concerns. This is a quote from the EU's top diplomat, Joseph Borrell. We've given Ukraine nearly 1 billion euros. That might seem like a lot, but 1 billion euros is what we're paying Putin every day for the energy he provides us with. Another concern is security. With Europe addicted to Russian gas and many industries relying on inputs, including fertilizers and metals, that dependency makes autocracy stronger and weakens democracy's resolve and exposes them to retaliation in war. So with all this, there's an underlying question that needs to be answered, and that is, should open societies conduct normal economic relations with autocratic ones like Russia and China that abuse human rights, endanger security, and grow more threatening the richer they get? And in principle, I think the answer is simple. Democracies should seek to maximize trade without compromising national security. And this applies to energy, sensitive technologies, medical, military, etc. So my last slide for you today talks about the Ukraine crisis specifically. And then some of the buckets around supply, pricing, production, and what it means for the green energy transition. So on the LNG side, America has promised 15 billion cubic meters of LNG for Europe in 2022. With that said, almost 100% of our liquefaction capacity is already in use, so no LNG will be exported. New volumes for Europe will come from reconfiguring existing supply contracts. New LNG plants don't happen overnight. They typically take about 4 to 5 years and billions of dollars of investment. Additional EU demand of 50 billion cubic meters per year of fuel from America by 2030. So we expect to see our LNG supply ramp up to meet their needs. Germany has no LNG terminals, but plans to build 2. It'll take several years. But the good news is floating terminals can be set up quickly. Germany just announced on May 5th that they signed contracts to charter 4 floating terminals to import liquefied natural gas. The installed capacity will be at least 20 billion cubic meters, which is about 1/5 of Germany's needs. The first one will be online by the end of the year, and the second one will be operational by early 2023. On the pricing side, in the US, prices are expected to see less volatility in comparison with Europe. That's difficult to say with the recent run-up of pricing, but as we'll discuss shortly here, our volatility pales in comparison to what they're seeing overseas. We still have enormous supply here, and at the present moment, limited capacity to export it. As LNG export capacity grows, there will be upwards pressure on pricing unless U.S. production ramps up to offset the newly exported gas. As more gas is exported, the closer we'll get drawn into the global marketplace for natural gas, which potentially could look much like the crude oil market throughout the world. There are 3 benchmarks for natural gas at hubs in Europe and Asia. In Europe, the hub is in the Netherlands, and it's known as the Dutch TTF. It peaked at $72 on March 7th, and currently May is trading at $27 per million BTU. In Asia, the marker is known as the Japan Korea marker, or JKM. It peaked at $84 on March 7th, and it's currently trading about $22.60. In the US, gas trades at Henry Hub in Louisiana, and it's been trading around $4.50, but recently it's ran up and is in the $7 to $9 range now. With so much volatility, it's not uncommon for an LNG vessel to depart the Gulf, go through the Panama Canal on its way to an Asian market, only to turn around and go through the canal a second time to divert to Europe just based on price changes. So it's a lot of volatility with the market, and operationally, or the physical supply will reroute to take advantage of pricing changes. Currently, about 20% of natural gas in the US is exported through pipelines and LNG. On the gas supply side here in the US, production has surged as a consequence of the shale revolution. We hit our lowest point of production in 2005, but since then, production has risen almost every year since. Along the way, the US became the world's top natural gas producer. As of January of 2020, there was 3,000 trillion cubic feet of recoverable dry natural gas in the United States. And at current rates of consumption, that supply will last about 98 years. On the production side, there are constraints that are worth talking about. The Biden administration's March 31 announcement that it will release an average of 1 million barrels a day of crude oil from the SPR, or the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, over the next 6 months was, I think, an acknowledgement of sorts that US exploration and production companies won't be ramping up enough in the near term to bring down the upwards pressure on oil and gas prices. Oil and natural gas producers indicate that they are planning on raising capital spending by about 20% this year, and that sounds good, but could be a little misleading. 2/3 of that spend will be related to oil field inflation. Just like many industries represented on this call, I'm sure, they also have their own supply chain issues, everything from truck drivers, oil field service workers, production piping, frac sand. It's all hard to come by and more expensive. Another thing that's happened is many producers went under in 2020 or came close to it when demand crashed due to the pandemic. They're hesitant to overextend their capital and are definitely more disciplined coming out of the pandemic. There's also environmental, social governance concerns. Political mixed signals don't encourage investment. And then many banks and investment firms are shifting away from fossil fuel investment due to the political mixed signals and especially investors' appetite for fossil fuel-based assets. This makes it much more difficult for smaller E&Ps to raise money and ramp up production. So we've covered a lot of ground, but what does this all mean for the green energy transition? And from my seat, I think the war is being viewed by many policymakers and companies as a chance to accelerate the energy transition away from fossil fuels. But in the short term, it may increase emissions. In the short term, we're going to see ramping up of oil, natural gas, and even coal potentially to meet the immediate needs of the world. It's an all hands on deck type of scenario. If you look just in the UK, they are taking several actions to reload fossil fuels in the short term. They're coming out with their UK Green Investment Rulebook, which will likely allow some natural gas projects to be labeled as sustainable, which is likely to draw criticism. I think the UK is interested in ensuring private financing is available for projects that support energy independence. So, 12 months ago, they probably wouldn't have included natural gas projects, but they're looking at doing that now. They're also looking to develop North Sea oil and gas output to improve energy security. They're holding talks with their 3 remaining coal operators about the possibility to keep stations running next winter after 2 of them would have been shut down. And they also had their largest natural gas storage site ready to be switched over to store hydrogen. That storage facility holds about 70% of the country's gas storage capacity, and they're looking at retaining that as a gas storage cavern, at least for the next couple of years. Many see the invasion of Ukraine as a wake-up call for the world, and in particular European nations with unhealthy dependencies. In the mid to long term, the war is seen as giving momentum to change behaviors and will accelerate the transition from clean energy to clean energy as countries look to alleviate the security concerns of relying on autocratic governments for their needs. I covered a lot of ground, but that is all I have for you today. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to present, and I look forward to your questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Adam. Paul, I believe you have a few slides, and we talking about how some of the things we just heard from Adam we're going to translate into the acceleration of decarbonization in Michigan.
Right. So I'm going to take all of that detail. I'm going to compress it down into professor speak and make it a little bit clearer as to how big these impacts are going to be. So let's see. Got to share my screen so you can see it. There you go. So you should be seeing a single screen right now. And so I'm going to go through several different components here. And these effects will ultimately lead to an acceleration of movement towards much greener energy. But there's some muddling that happens in the short term. So I want to make sure we sort of walk through that. All right. So we've just heard natural gas prices have gone up as a result of the Ukraine. We've talked, he's just talked about that there's greater volatility going forward, that people are worried about having energy that they control from a national security point of view. And interestingly enough, it was hidden in part of what he said, where he said natural gas was used for fertilizer, but it's also resulted in substantial changes in fertilizer use that likely will increase land use for agriculture, particularly in the third world. So I just used an antiquated term. I'm sorry, I'm old. In developing economies. All right. So to really see the effect in the United States and in Europe, which is most of what this has been looking at so far, it's really important to notice that this change matters. Okay. So if we look at the levelized cost of electricity for new natural gas plants, and we look at it from different levels of the price of natural gas across time. As the price of natural gas goes up, the levelized cost of electricity generated from those plants increases. All right. So what's important to look at is several of the normal players for this, something like onshore wind, had sort of this pricing. So it was less than most of that bar. All right. Solar, the levelized cost was even less here in the United States. And solar with battery was up here. So depending on the price of natural gas, we start to have different options that become economically available. By the way, these are prices from the EIA, and they do not include subsidies. So if you're, oh, these are subsidized prices, these are not the subsidized prices. And the subsidized prices generally for these types of things are on the order of less than 10%. In many cases, it's only 5%. So realize that they'll affect these numbers and push them down, those red bars, but it won't push them all the way down below that price of natural gas. Okay, so if we look and pull back up this slide that Adam showed earlier, this price of natural gas per million BTU here in the United States across time, what you can see here is that in this last sort of period, we had this big run up. And as we looked at the analyst expectations for the price of natural gas for the next few years prior to the Ukraine, we were really looking at right in this range here, the range that it's really been trading for the last 10 years, right? This has brought it up to much higher prices, all right? And even more recently, even higher, all right? Why is this important? Because the old expected price was down here. So these things were marginally economical without subsidies, all right? The new price that we're looking at is up here. So now all of these renewable choices are economical, and they're economical without subsidies, and they're economical on a big enough gap that the ROI for these projects starts to improve. So this starts to become really, really important in financial decisions for switching costs, okay? Because we know that natural gas for electricity is described as that transitional fuel. It improves the carbon levels from coal and the fuels that we were using, and then it transitions us to these more renewable resources that we're moving towards. So it gives us that intermediate step. So this is really good here in the United States for really creating a momentum for businesses to say, we want to increase this. The timing couldn't be worse, because as we look at that solar piece, we have this. We have a US probe of several different solar cells manufacturers coming into the United States. And that probe essentially has resulted in the majority of solar investment here in the United States grinding to a halt until this probe is done, and that we can figure this out. And that will happen this summer. But during that time, we're frozen and we're not choosing or thinking very hard about this. And it means that currently we're not seeing that investment that we would expect to see at this point in time. From a renewable standpoint, the good news is these higher prices for natural gas is expected to stay elevated. Adam talked about the fact that we're not seeing the drilling that we would expect for many different reasons. He also talked about the fact that we were going to have to build capacity to help Europe wean itself off of Russian natural gas as a result of the Ukraine. The combination of those two things will help elevate the price of natural gas going forward. And so it makes these renewable projects more economical, okay? But CO2 is a worldwide problem. So Europe is playing a different game. First of all, they now have to worry about scarcity. If Russia shuts off their gas, they don't have enough, all right? Their prices are even higher. They're getting deals on solar panels now because US projects have been delayed or US projects have been canceled as a result of this trade spat that's going on, all right? And they have an even clearer path to national security. If they don't do this, they have to keep trying to be nice with a country that they may or may not want to be nice with, all right? So just to graphically make this even more obvious, he gave you the prices, but here's the change. So if we look at those spot prices from the Henry to the Asian to the European, we were all trading sort of in that same range as we went into 2020. As the Ukraine became more and more of a possibility, look what happened. And the Asian price went up because Europe started competing for that natural gas component. So this has really increased the incentives across these two locations from the natural gas point of view. All right. Now, despite what we're seeing here in the Asian, so the European case is very clear. We see them moving faster, we see them installing faster, and we see them creating shortcuts and government policies even to move even faster than they were before, okay? Sorry, I think you just saw my email pop up. So, all right. Here's the second problem. China and India may offset some of these gains in the short run. And the reason is that they aren't playing in the sanctions game. So they're getting oil at a 25% discount because they're buying it from Russia. All right. They're getting cheaper carbon fuels, and those cheaper carbon fuels will induce people to use more carbon. All right. So in the short run, because of the changes in trade flow patterns that are happening, Russia is moving what it would be supplying in Europe and trying to supply it to China, and if they can, India. All right. Not really possible with natural gas in great amounts right now, but if they want to, that's where they'll be putting their investment. Okay. An odd piece here is the deforestation pressure. So this also affects the net carbon. So what we've seen is an increase in cost of fertilizer. The initial run up in natural gas increased fertilizer prices by about 60%. All right. After the Ukraine, our fertilizer prices in many cases were over 300%. And this is because natural gas is used to make many of the fertilizers. All right. What we've seen is farmers not plant. They've chosen not to plant because they don't have enough fertilizer, or they are not fertilizing as much and sacrificing yield to get at least some product out. What this does across many of those developing countries, especially places like Brazil, that we have a lot of concern about with deforestation, is it's going to be increasing their pressure to create more arable land and move that from the forested components. So this one I'm watching pretty closely because this could have longer term effects than the offsets that we're seeing on the China and India side. Okay. So just to sort of tie this together, because I wanted to make sure we have time for questions. Okay. In the long run, the medium term, and the short run, this is an acceleration of renewables in the West. So as we look at the Europe, as we look at the United States, and we look at countries allied with the West, Japan, South Korea, and Australia, this will accelerate in all three timeframes the use of renewables. In the short term, it looks like it's going to result in a decrease in renewable implementation across Asia. And that's because they're pulling in this cheaper carbon from Russia at this point. And in the midterm, as they will feel less pressure on the transition. So it will slow down the movement towards renewables in Asia in the mid time frame. But then as we get to that longer time frame, they're still going to get there. So the question is, how does that impact the front end of this decarbonization cycle? And that's the most important component as we think about trying to avoid some of the worst effects of carbon dioxide. And it's going to really affect us as to how much the West can really ramp down as we see those Asian countries not participate quite as hard from an economic point of view. All right. So I've run through pretty quickly there. I've tried to keep it at a pretty high level, and I've tried to sort of augment what Adam was talking about. So that leaves us to our commentators sort of guiding Q&A.
Thank you, Paul and Adam. And Adam, if I could ask you to rejoin us.
Sure.
So we have a few questions in the Q&A here, and if for anyone attending today, if you also have any questions, please feel free to use either the Q&A feature or the chat today. The first question: it's clear how recent events have impacted commodity prices for oil and gas, but how have the prices of materials for solar, wind, batteries, etc., been comparatively impacted? I've read a lot about the supply chain disruptions and crunches for these as well. Paul, I'm guessing this is probably a question for you.
Yeah, well, everything has gone up in price. So, but what we have seen is the percentage increase in price for that carbon has gone up more than the percentage increase in price in the supply chain in solar. So the biggest problem here in the United States is that international component, given the tariff complaints that have been lodged and are running through the government process right now. That's sort of slowed down the ability to do that. We're going to have a side problem that really starts to come in pretty soon as a result of the Ukraine. And that has to do with etching the circuitry necessary for these things. So to etch the circuits, you need lasers. To use lasers, you need something called a noble gas. A large chunk, the majority of the noble gases that have been sold in the world over the last 10 years have come from a steel plant that you've all seen in the news because it's in that nice little place where the Ukrainians were surrounded and hiding underneath, and you've seen it reduced to rubble. So that's going to result in possible increases in those costs as we get to the latter part of this year, as the supply chain starts to run out of those gases that were being created there. So we're watching that very carefully. But this summer, the 25% increase in the price of 25 to 40% increase in the price of gas, of gasoline, that almost doubling in the price of natural gas is bigger than what the supply chain constraints that we're seeing in solar and wind right now.
Adam, do you have any thoughts you'd like to add as well?
I don't. I think Paul covered it well, and it's a little bit outside of my kind of sphere of stuff I'm tracking. So thank you.
Here's a question that I think is probably better suited for you, Adam. So with the additional pressures that are being placed on fossil fuels that are likely to encourage accelerated investments in decarbonization, what opportunities are there available for public and private investments to emerge in this? And I think knowing the person who asked this questions, I think kind of thinking specifically how investments could be used to support job creation or improve wealth equity in under-resourced neighborhoods, such as those in the Grand Rapids area.
Yeah, so I think at my seat at the utility, I'm focused, the majority of my time is dealing with kind of some of our larger commercial and industrial end users. So I'm familiar with programs that help them more out than kind of some of the issues you're talking about. But across the board for residential, commercial, and industrial, we have a ever-evolving energy efficiency and rebate program, which money is going into that program that is to be pulled out for use for energy efficiency projects. And so there's a lot of things that you can do around energy consumption at any facility. But if you haven't plucked the low-hanging fruit and made your house, commercial business, or industrial process as tight as you can so that you're not buying unnecessary $9 gas in this environment, that's the first thing that you should tackle. And I apologize, I'm not able to speak to it more, but there are other resources at DT that could really hone in on what the specific interest or question is that I'd be more than happy to find those people to answer that question.
Do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't have exact specific opportunities that are available. But as we look at things, we can say that all the utilities are putting forward components, and we're seeing a lot of new things starting to move through the legislatures as the prices have gone up. And so, unfortunately, I can't speak to it, but I'm seeing new things come up.
Great. And I have a question. I think this is probably more specific to Adam also. Uh, Over the past year, through the Michigan Healthy Climate Plan stakeholder engagement process, there was a lot of talk about energy intensive industries and those that would be difficult to decarbonize. A lot of industry that's using high heat processes, chemical cracking, and in these areas where it'd be more challenging to switch them over to electrification or some other strategy. So as there is additional pricing pressure for their historic use, how do we expect these companies to respond, and how do we expect resources like their utilities to help them through this?
Yeah, so I think one of the major changes that's taken place over the last 10 years is I think facilities have gotten much more fluid and invested in optionality at their plants. So if there's an option to fuel switch and use something else, to shut down, to take load off the system and maybe potentially receive some type of credit, they're all invested in looking at what optionality does my plant have to use less, fuel switch, do other things. I think at the utility level, we are constantly looking at, and this is one of the things that makes my job so interesting, is that the market is changing rapidly, and we're sitting on a pile of assets when you look at storage, pipelines, things of that nature. And it's the question that needs to be answered is, how are those pipelines and existing assets utilized in this new future that we're stepping into? And I think probably one of the most promising things for high heat industrial uses is, what does hydrogen look like for them in the future? And it can be sourced in a plant right next to them, so they're getting a direct supply. I know DTE is doing some work for blending hydrogen into the existing system, so that it can be utilized even at home in traditional appliances. But I think that's going to be a huge key for what their operations look like going forward. It's kind of that fuel switching thing that we talked about earlier, but it's hydrogen to gas or completely hydrogen.
Paul, do you have any thoughts?
Well, I think one of the interesting effects of all this is the concept of reshoring some of this business back here from places like China. As much as they're dirty businesses, they're cleaner when they're here than they are in many of these other countries. And so the question starts to be, can they do that? Do the price changes that we're seeing be big enough that it makes sense to do that? And certainly to the extent that they're exposed to oil more than gas, there's a lot of sign that they're going to want to resource elsewhere in Asia, as opposed to bring it back here and continue to carbonize. So to the extent that we see the Ukraine really causing Russia to have a smaller group of countries that it's selling product to, and that smaller group of countries being willing to take that product, okay, that those countries are going to be able to get that at a better price and continue using this for a longer period of time. So again, the carbon issue is a worldwide issue. So if we push on the balloon over here and it expands over there, it doesn't help us. So I'll be very curious to see how that plays out.
I think that's probably been one of the most interesting things in this horrible thing that we've seen unfold over the last 100 days, is just the supply chain setup fundamentally has shifted. And like you're saying, with those flows from Russia now being absorbed by trading partners in India or China, it's like if you're moving that supply chain into one of those environments, it's not the step forward that you think it might be. So like bringing things back here, I think, is what a lot of people are looking at, industrial and commercial customers, but also just reevaluating the alliances with it embedded in your supply chain.
Wonderful. And the lots. Adam, Paul, I think you've both given us a lot to think about today. Again, thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. For those who are attending today, this is our program. As you log off, you'll see a very brief survey about the webinar today. Please take a few seconds to respond to that. If you did find this talk valuable, please consider becoming a member or checking out our website for upcoming webinars and other opportunities at wmsbf.org. And hope to see you at our one of our upcoming events or webinars. Again, thank you so much, Paul. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you.
And that's our program today.
Thank you.